Welcome back to Discussion-Based Teaching Explained, a channel dedicated to discussion-based classrooms on which I will explore how to teach and learn in a discussion-based environment. I'm Adam. I'm a teacher, and I've been developing a discussion-based teaching practice for 18 years now, and though it's still very much a work in progress, I'm hoping on this channel to share some beliefs and practices I've found successful over the years. The first 7 episodes of this channel were focused on discussion-based teaching philosophy. Then, starting with episode number 8 all the way through episode number 11, I started turning towards discussion skill building exercises. Now I want to continue with discussion skill building exercises, and I want to focus on some things that are really important for your discussion-based classroom after day 1, but really within that first week or 2. And one of the most important things to do is norming your classroom. So welcome to Discussion-Based Teaching episode number 12, the 10 dispositions of discussion. The 10 dispositions of discussion are kind of my terminology for the norms of behavior in our classroom, but even more so for the mindset that we want students to approach our class with. So before I kind of share with you mine, I want to ask an important reflection question. What are the norms of your classroom, and how and when do you establish them? I mean, as I've probably already made clear, I deeply believe in the 10 benefits of discussion. And when I think about discussions in a nutshell, I think that the purpose of discussion are fourfold. Number 1, to help discussants reach a more critically informed perspective on the topics. Number 2, to enhance discussants' self-awareness and capacity for self-critique. Number 3, to foster among discussants an appreciation for the diversity of opinions and perspectives that is sure to emerge in an honest, healthy discussion. And number 4, to act as kind of a catalyst to inspire students to take action in the world. And to achieve these 4 goals and to have the 10 benefits of discussion, it's really important at the beginning of the year that some behavioral norms are established that I call the dispositions of discussion. And I really want to share my 10 dispositions of discussion with you. But before I do, I really want to introduce 5 concepts for establishing these behavioral norms. Number 1 is that making discussions good means making them critical. Discussing critically implies an openness to rethinking our cherished assumptions. This requires that people enter the discussion flexible enough to be persuaded by arguments and counter-arguments, and also confident enough to retain their original ideas if the rebuttals fall short. Although agreement is sometimes desirable, it's by no means necessary in a good discussion. And such disagreement and the continued existence of differences of opinion is really served by a team wedded to the dispositions of discussion. And I think before I go on, I wanted to pose another reflection question is, where is your tension dar? And by this I mean, how tense can things get in your classroom that you're still comfortable with? And when do they cross a line? And is that line in the same place that the student's line is? And have you made your line clear? The second thing I want you to think about with discussions and why the dispositions are so important is that discussions require what I call a reflective equilibrium, or sometimes I call it like leaving your hard nutshell at the door. I mean, discussion is a big ask. Discussants are asked to hold often competing ideas in their head simultaneously. I mean, one thing that they're really asked is to reconsider the paradigm that confidence and intelligence in a discussion means doggedly holding on to your intellectual position. And instead, they're asked to consider that real confidence and real intelligence is more along the lines of what philosopher Michael Sandel calls a reflective equilibrium. One way of understanding the reflective equilibrium is like a pendulum in which the fulcrum sometimes moves also. So imagine this pendulum swinging back and forth, and this is where your head's at. And this is a lot of different ideas, but you're maintaining your position. That if you're hearing some things that are very compelling, you're going to allow that fulcrum to move and establish a new reflective equilibrium. And the idea that we would let that fulcrum move, that takes guts, that takes confidence. That is the real kind of confidence that we're looking for. And again, like I said, establishing the 10 dispositions of discussion really allows for those reflective equilibriums to happen. The third thing is that dispositions of discussion or behavioral norms really need to be chosen deliberately and intentionally. Now, I want to be very clear. I have taken mine from a really important source for my professional development, and that is Brookfield and Preskill's Discussion as a Way of Teaching. And I totally understand and respect that a lot of you would prefer to do some type of norming exercises with students at the beginning of the year. And honestly, I used to do this too. And there are three reasons I don't anymore. Honestly, reason number one is because I think it's a little bit played out and trite. It's a little bit of an eye roller for the students. And I guess the second reason, which kind of informs the first, is that it's a little repetitive and I end up with words like respect and listen and things like that, which aren't bad, but they really kind of like are a little too ethereal and floaty. And honestly, the third reason is the most important reason, is quite simply because I don't think the students are really qualified yet to create dispositional norms for their classroom, because for the most part, a lot of them haven't really been in a real discussion class yet. So asking them to create norms is asking them to decide how things should be before they really have any idea of how things should be. In fact, to go one step further, a lot of their experiences with discussion-based class in the past were pretty negative. So they're not only uninformed about what a discussion-based class should be, but they're creating norms for experience that a lot of them didn't find very pleasant, which I guess brings us to another reflection question. From where do you derive your atmosphere? What sources or experiences or expectations do you have for what the atmosphere or dispositions of your students should look like? So a fourth thing about the dispositions of discussion is they need to be introduced early. I usually introduce the students to them on the second or third day, and they're included in a reading that I usually do on the first or second night about the philosophy of discussion. I alert them to the DODs and usually refer to a poster hanging in my room. And sometimes if I'm not teaching in the same room, I'll shrink down the DODs to kind of a little tiny thing and have them paste it in the back of their journals. And usually on that first day when we're going over the DODs, I'll ask the students to really consider them and maybe choose two that they want to commit to for that day. And I'll often ask students to reflect for a few minutes about why they chose what they chose. So really by the third day of class, they've read about discussion philosophy, they've entertained the DODs, they've written about the DODs, they've talked about the DODs in class, they've looked at the poster of the DODs in class. It's kind of like firmly established early. But the fifth thing about the DODs is that they really have to be reinforced often. And honestly, the DODs will prove meaningless unless they are reinforced. And honestly, it's got to be done every day for that first third of the year during that first third of class that I discussed. That might sound like a burden, but the good news is it takes almost no time. For the first few days, what I'll do is ask them to check in with their DODs, like which ones are you working with, how are you doing with them, that kind of thing. But a few weeks later, literally it's just before we start the discussion, I'll simply say, reacquire your DODs and get them on your new page of your journal. And then almost automatically, students are flipping back to the last page of their discussion journal. They're looking at the two DOD words that they used, and they're bringing them ahead. A couple of weeks later, what I might even do is have them quickly assess themselves on their DODs at the end of class. I'll say, give me a 0 if you didn't think about it at all, a 1 if you're okay, 2 pretty good, 3 you crushed it. And then very simply, they'll just put like 2, 3, and that'll be it. So it's really anything, something, every day, 1 minute, 10 seconds, just constant, minimal reinforcement. And so this becomes, to me, another really important reflection question for us discussion-based teachers is how do you hammer your DODs, or how do you hammer your discussion norms? Okay, so now you have an idea of how important the DODs are to a discussion-based classes culture. And you have an idea of how important it is to introduce them early and reinforce them often. So now let's look at the 10 dispositions of discussion. Number 1, hospitality. Hospitality is the creation of an atmosphere in which people feel invited to participate. Hospitality implies a mutual receptivity to new ideas, and maybe more important, a willingness to question even the most widely accepted assumptions. It doesn't mean that standards are lowered or that we're overly concerned with stepping on other people's toes. It means really that the painful things are made possible. Things like testing hypotheses or exposing ignorance and mutual criticism. Number 2 is participation. Simply put, critical discussion works best when a large number of students participate. And while it may be desirable that everyone speaks, not everyone really has to. What's really essential is that everyone finds ways to contribute to everyone's understanding. Number three is mindfulness. And paying attention to someone else's words is not easy. I mean, without listeners who are careful and patient, discussion can't really proceed beyond like a superficial level. And a really important component of mindfulness is tact. And tact sometimes means holding in check our own desires to express ourselves, but it also does not mean holding all our opinions in check. In fact, a tactful person can do quite a bit of talking, but it really does oblige us to pay attention to what has been said and what has not been said, and maybe to pay attention to who has had a voice and who has yet to have a voice in discussion. Number four is humility. Humility is the ability to admit that one's knowledge and one's experiences are limited. It means acknowledging that others in the group have something to teach us that may change our feelings. Number five is mutuality. Mutuality implies that it is in everyone's interest to care as much about each other's evolution as about their own. We understand that our flourishing in discussion depends entirely on the flourishing of others in discussion. Embracing mutuality as a team will hopefully have people take more risks. Mutuality is a tough one also because a lot of us are teaching in schools where the students are pretty competitive with each other. Number six is deliberation. Deliberation refers to discussants' willingness to discuss things as fully as possible, and to do so by offering arguments that are supported by data and logic and evidence, and then to hold to these ideas unless there's good reason not to. Put another way, discussions should be really highly contentious forums. And in these forums, different points of view are forcefully, though civilly, put forward. And these ideas are put forward by as many different participants as possible. Deliberative people enter the discussion knowing that their ideas might be modified. Number seven is appreciation. Few of us take enough time in our lives to appreciate others for a helpful insight. In some ways, students enter my discussion-based class sometimes resistant to acknowledge each other's ideas because they think that someone who has a good idea has won, or because they think if they acknowledge another person's ideas, they're like kissing butt or something. And those are the kinds of things that the 10 DODs are trying to create an environment where that's really not the case. Number eight is hope. Without hope of reaching a new understanding, of evolving your thinking, then there's really less motivation to kind of continue the process. Hope can really sustain us when we're kind of, as a team, encountering what seem like insurmountable problems. Hope kind of provides us with a sense that the effort and the work and the difficulty will really serve us in the end. Number nine is autonomy. We want to honor people who have the courage and strength to hold an opinion not widely shared. Autonomy sometimes implies a position of kind of being aloof or alone, maybe of being uninterested or unwilling to collaborate. But I think autonomy is really important to honor as a temporary state of being, like where a discussant can say, this is where I stand at this time, but that discussant is also willing to subject that position to constant reevaluation. And number 10 is the appreciation of plurality. Pluralism is essentially variety. Discussions quite simply require that we accept multiple perspectives, a wide variety of opinions. Related to this, and probably more important, is the idea of rejecting our need for certainty. We need to be comfortable with the inevitable gray area of discussion. In fact, this is probably, in my opinion, the most important disposition of discussion, to avoid certitude. And letting go of certitude, avoiding certitude, is not only a really difficult thing for anyone to do, and certainly for teenagers, but it's also something that they've been encouraged to do coming into your class, most likely. And what we are trying to do to honor all the dispositions of discussion is to really avoid certitude. So that becomes a really constant theme of discussion in my classroom. So let me add a couple quick reflection questions here. First of all, after hearing my 10 dispositions of discussion, what are your dispositions of discussion? And also, how do you address certitude in your classroom? Those seem really important to me. Well, that's it, the 10 dispositions of discussion. And please check out the next episode where I'm going to look at how to create team camaraderie. And also, by the way, for this episode, there's a couple episodes like this. I really want to give a big shout out to Brookfield and Presskill for their awesome book because it just really crushes it. So thanks for watching.